So class, as I promised earlier in the morning that I would send you some details about the fundamental uh, ideas of axiology. Axiology, as I told you before, is the study about the standards and the values of certain objects and uh, and phenomena around us. So what actually determines the value, and where does the value come from, and what determines the standards with which certain things are considered as valuable, whereas other things are considered valueless. So what actually is value? So I want you to please remember the word value and against its synonym, another word which means almost the same, and that is price. So you can somehow understand the as Oscar Wilde has very rightly put it, that the modern man knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. So we start from this very distinction that Oscar Wilde has tried to make between price and value. So price refers to the material worth of an object, or material worth of a task, or an event, or an experience, or a phenomena, whereas value refers to maybe the immaterial, the uh, the and when I use the word immaterial, I actually mean something that cannot be monetarily defined. Maybe monetarily defined. Nevertheless, it has a great value in human life, subjectively and collectively. For example, the value of an uh, old vase that you possess in your family as part of your family legacy, or the value of the old carpet that you have inherited from your great great grandfathers, right? Or the value of maybe the an old book, a manuscript that has been given to you after a generations long preservation. So maybe these things can be considered as valuable, whereas you won't be finding some really monetary worth of these objects. So value and standards, the branch of philosophy that deals with the ideas of values and standards, the standards which define value, and the values which are actually um, uh, seen in the context of certain standards, uh, is called axiology. I told you before in the short clip that axiology deals with the problems of values and standards. So now, by defining these values and standards into three basic heads, you can talk about the values and standards of number one, truth; number two, the values and standard of beauty; and number three, goodness. So what is truth? Truth pertains to philosophy believes that there are certain things true and certain things are false. So the truthfulness and the falsity of certain objects is one axiological concern, and that refers to philosophers' endeavor to logically and rationally determine the truthfulness of the objects or the falsity of the objects. Certain objects are true and certain are false, and that can be rationally or logically or good and debated. Then, whereas the standards and values of beauty and ugliness what come from what philosophy calls aesthetics. So aesthetics actually is one uh, axiological theme that determines the standards of beauty and ugliness. And lastly is the standards and values of goodness that pertains to the idea of ethics. So, and I told you that every society has certain standards of good and bad, and they may not necessarily come from religion. They most of the time or primarily come from religion, as we believe that honesty and truthfulness and punctuality and integrity and justice are good human or good human characteristics, but and we actually locate them in different religions, and different uh, religions may be the divine, predominantly divine religions, whereas uh, we cannot say that the societies which do not have any religion, any certified religion of Christianity or Islam or Judaism or any other man-made religion, uh, are devoid of all standards of goodness or bad, good or bad. They also have their own standards of good and bad, and that is what we call ethics. So the very thin line of distinction between morals and ethics, once again, is that morals are primarily derived from religion, whereas ethics are um, or may be located in non-religious sources. Maybe the secular societies have certain ethical standards, and ethical standards determine why certain things are considered good, whereas certain things are considered bad. So I'm sure आपको ये तीन बातें मेरी समझ में आ गई. Now we are moving towards what is logic. So logic that determines the standards of truth that I referred as the first axiological concern. What is logic? Logic is a normative science of valid thinking. Now the words are again difficult. Normative science of valid thinking. So logic is something that pertains to human mind. Okay? So the word logic actually comes from a Greek word that means logos, and logos can be uh, translated into multiple meanings: sentence, discourse, reason, rule, ratio, account, rational principle, definition, laws of thought, rules of right reasoning, valid argumentation, logical constants. Now these are all different shades of logic. So logic is something which can be rationally talked about or good and proved right or wrong. That is logic. So logic is primarily a mental capacity of argumentation or rational ability of presenting your argument before people so that it becomes a valid and viable argument. So the word valid, validity and plausibility are very important. There are two propositions which a logical argument presents before you, and by means of presenting it in a way, you say that maybe the statement A is more logical than statement B. The proposition A is more logical than proposition B, or more plausible than proposition B. So that is, uh, while we can say that the source of logic is again the human faculty of reasoning or human faculty of valid argumentation, nonetheless we cannot say that logic is always fixed and established and uncontested. So my logical argument can be extremely illogical, can sound extremely illogical to you. So depending upon the way I present it before you, and depending upon your own subjective perception about it. Then logic or logical argument can further be divided into two basic forms. One is inductive and other is deductive. So deductive reasoning is actually the reasoning where you are trying to make one proposition, for example, that men are mortal, and then the second proposition is that X is man, so X is mortal. So you are actually trying to make a specific statement, and then from that specific statement you are deducing a general rule which can be applied to different people in different circumstances maybe, and that is deductive reasoning. Okay? So deductive reasoning is mostly the mathematical formula. It is based upon deducing or inference out of two propositions and then trying to talk about maybe offering a generalized theory or law or a principle. Inductive reasoning, on the other hand, is um, um, uh, you can say that which is actually where you move from the general argument to a specific premise. For example, all A is mortal, B is mortal, C is mortal, and from these specific laws you are actually moving towards all human beings are mortal. ठीक है? So from specific to, when you move from specific argument to general argument, that is inductive reasoning, and when you move from specific argument to general argument, that is deductive reasoning. I'm sure I'm not confusing. From specific argument to a general theory and principle is deduction, and from a specific from a general argument, nahi, sorry, did I miss? I think I missed. मुझे एक बार let me get double check it. The example आप ज़हन में रखिएगा that all men are mortal. A is mortal, so A is a man, so so A is also mortal. So this is deductive reasoning. And A is mortal, B is mortal, C is mortal, and meaning thereby that all of them are mortal. ठीक है? So this is inductive reasoning. And then we have another form of reasoning, and that is abductive reasoning. उसको आप अभी छोड़ दीजिए, वो शायद आपका बहुत ज़्यादा basic concern नहीं है. And then we move on to the aesthetics. Aesthetics का जो principle है मैंने आपको पहले भी बता दिया था. Aesthetic is the core concern of literature. The imaginative science, जितनी भी science of imagination is actually an aesthetic science. Or Aristotle, while defining aesthetics, tells us that aesthetic is the standard of beauty and ugliness, and the beauty and ugliness के जो standards हैं, they are largely determined by what Aristotle calls humans' innate sense for proportion, for balance, for equilibrium. So everything that is proportionate is aesthetically satisfying. So, और इसकी example क्या हो सकती है? That you can not appreciate the beauty of an object by staying too close to it or by staying too far away from it. So you have to actually maintain a sort of balance to appreciate the proportion and the size of an object. So that is one dimension of beauty. But then again, like logic, aesthetics actually has multiple dimensions, and one object which is considered as beauty for one culture may be considered as ugliness for another culture. And one very significant example is the racist ideology, where the beauties, the standards of beauty come from the blue eyes, the blonde hair, the white complexion. These are considered as the beauty, the standards of beauty and fairness. Okay? And all the cultures that has been racist or that has remained under the influence of this racist ideology largely, more or less, agree with these standards of white beauty. Toni Morrison in Beloved, and Sula in many other, the most famous is Toni Morrison का वो जो novel है, The Bluest Eye. She talks about the idea of how the bluest eye, the black girl craves for bluest eyes, because the bluest eyes were considered as the ultimate standard of beauty. But then when we look at the flip side of it, the same standards are not universal. The standards of beauty are not universal. The branch of philosophy that deals with the standards of beauty and ugliness is actually considered is one concern of axiology. And finally we move towards class ethics. So ethics के बारे में मैंने आपको basic definition जो है वो आपको बता दी है. Before actually going into ethics, मुझे beauty के बारे में एक बात और बताने दीजिए कि beauty के standards और values जो हैं वो relative हो सकते हैं, but human quest and love for beauty is universal. That Keats, the romantic poet, has very rightly put it, a thing of beauty is a joy forever. So that means that beauty actually has a subtle connection with joy, with the feelings of joy and pleasure. So everything which is beautiful gives us pleasure, right? And then we move towards aesthetics की जो सबसे बड़ी aesthetic, एक और word, एक बात और ज़हन में भी रखिएगा, the word aesthetic also comes from the Greek word aesthetikos, that means sense perception. So aesthetic is something which is beauty and ugliness, and the sense of beauty and ugliness largely comes from sensuous experiences. इस sense के experiences के through हम determine करते हैं कि what is beautiful and what is ugly. ठीक है, लेकिन इसका ये मतलब नहीं है कि beauty is all about the sensory experiences and everything which is beyond sense is not beautiful. ठीक है। लेकिन जैसे हम कहते हैं ब्यूटीफुल वॉइस, तो आई हेयर समथिंग एंड इट इज़ मेलोडियस, it is not piercing, so I say, though, what a beautiful voice it is, right? And I look at the face of, and I say the moon face of the beloved, right? So how do we determine uh, an object, a beautiful object? By making, primarily by making a sensory appeal to it, कि आंखों को अच्छा लगता है, भला लगता है, कानों को सुनने में अच्छा लगता है, टेस्ट को अच्छा लगता है, ज़बान को अच्छा लगता है. सो दैट इज़ व्हाट वी कॉल, तो ब्यूटी जो है वो उसका ताल्लुक सेंस परसेप्शन के साथ भी है, एंड दैट इज़ द लिटरल मीनिंग ऑफ द वर्ड एस्थेटिकोस इन ग्रीक लैंग्वेज, from where the word has been borrowed and used in English language. And finally comes the idea of ethics. मैंने आपको पहले भी क्लास बता दिया कि ethics जो होती हैं deal with the basic human virtues, the basic human features that we want to see in us individually and collectively, including morality, truth, justice, integrity, honesty. ठीक है. We all, and human nature does not want to see violence, abuse, tyranny, injustice, dishonesty. We abhor, naturally we have an instinctive love for what is just and honest, and what is and hate what is dishonest and unjust. ठीक है. Unkind. So whereas kindness is a human virtue, ethically speaking, unkindness or violence or abuse, physical abuse or emotional abuse, are considered as unethical, right? इसी वजह से जब अगर कोई हमारे सामने किसी को मार रहा हो या उसके ऊपर कोई टॉर्चर कर रहा हो, तो हमारी नेचुरली हमारी जो पर्सनैलिटी है उससे उसको हेट करती है, वी हेट इट नेचुरली. सो दिस इज एथिक्स. और फिर एथिक्स के आगे डिफरेंट फॉर्म्स हैं. अगेन basically the word ethic again comes from the Greek word ethos, or ethos is a word which is used again in English as well, meaning custom and character, and it is a branch of philosophy that contemplates what is right and what is wrong, how morality is different from ethics, and where do the standards of morality and ethics come from. And finally, remember, so there are two basic divisions in ethics: the normative ethics and applied ethics. So normative ethics are actually the ethics or ethical standards which you can consider as universal or basic or fundamental ethical standards. And then, जैसे for example, the normative ethics is the idea of justice. Normative ethics का मतलब ये है that we all believe in the notion of justice. But when we look at a particular system of justice in Islam, so Islam tells you to amputate, to cut the hand of the thief. Apparently it seems to be a violent activity, but given and by situating this very punishment in the total system of justice that Islam wants to create, this becomes something which is apparently not normatively just but applied justice. अप्लाइड जस्टिस का मतलब ये है कि वो जस्टिस के स्टैंडर्ड जो सोसाइटी में डिफरेंटली प्रिवेल करते हैं और रिलेटिव होते हैं. और नॉर्मेटिव जस्टिस क्या होती है कि वो बेसिक आइडिया ऑफ जस्टिस, जस्टिस एज ए नोशन एंड जस्टिस एज ए प्रैक्टिस, इन दोनों में डिफरेंस है. और इस्लाम जब आपको पनिशमेंट का सिस्टम या जो इस्लाम को जो पेनल्टी का जो ऑर्डर है, जो पीनल कोड है, वो आपको ये बताता है कि अगर आप चोर को सजा नहीं देंगे और मुजरिम का हाथ नहीं काटेंगे तो आप यू वुड एक्चुअली बी क्रिएटिंग एन अनजस्ट सोसाइटी. ठीक है. तो वो जो नॉर्मेटिव जस्टिस के स्टैंडर्ड्स हैं उसमें आपको शायद ये वाला एक्ट जस्ट ना लगे, लेकिन अप्लाइड जस्टिस में आपको ये बात समझ में आएगी कि उसके जो कॉन्सिक्वेंसेस हैं सोसाइटी के लिए, they bring about peace or they ensure justice, which again becomes a universal human characteristic or feature. So we stop here, class. I am sure you are able to understand something, so please feel free to ask any question via WhatsApp.